October 21st, 2020. This is the Arlington County, Virginia Board of Equalization hearing. The first case on the agenda is Economic Unit 3400203A at 1505 Crystal Drive, and Mr. Jeremy Chitlick is here representing the owners. Mr. Chitlick, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about the property.
All right, thank you. So the property is a 362-unit high-rise apartment building located in Crystal City. The back of it faces the airport. The front of it faces Crystal Drive. It's kind of the shape of the building is curved, and they sit next to each other, so it kind of makes somewhat of like an S shape. Typically, we just go through page 3 and go through each of the cases or parts of the case. This one's a little different because for once we have a perfect comp. And I say a perfect comp because we've got a property that's directly across the street that's sold. And I want to talk about the sales for a little bit. I know this is a little different than I usually approach this, but so Water Park Towers is currently assessed at $413,444 per unit. The property Crystal Square Apartments sold in 2017 for $135 million, which is $357 a unit. So we're talking about just over $60,000 less per unit. And of course, well, unit mixes are different. It's true that property has bigger units and higher rents. That property, in my appeal, I state, and I want to correct this, and I know I don't like to typically skip around, but I'm on what's page 67 of 142. I state that property is currently assessed at $146,295,900, which is $387,000 per unit, which obviously is a bit upsetting to the owner when we shared that with them, because they say, wait, how could we possibly be assessed $30,000 a unit higher when they have bigger units with higher rent? Well, then we dug in a little bit. That property got an $8 million reduction to the first level. So they're now actually assessed at $365 per unit. So they were reduced according to the website at the review level for this year, and their current assessment is now $138,288,900, which comes to just over $365,000 per unit. I gave you a unit mix there, a breakdown, because I know it property we need to look at it in a comparable set. That property has more 3 bedrooms. The average unit size is over 1,200 square feet as compared to the subject, which is under 1,000 square feet. That property is a 4-star property in CoStar as compared to the subject, which is a 3-star property in CoStar. And their rents are higher on a per unit. Now, the asking rents are about the same per square foot, but note that that's because their units are 30% larger. So there's no reason that we should be, and we stayed in the packet, $26,000 per unit higher than that property, which is a block away and it recently sold, let alone $46,000, which happened after the first level. So kind of going on that same thought, Crystal Flats, and I know that you all are aware of Crystal Flats because when I looked at the assessment, it was reduced from a BOE decision this year, so I know it's been in front of you. Crystal Flats is a far superior property. It's basically a 5-star property. It's newer. It's extremely nice. It sold in June of 2019 for $73.5 million. The property was reduced by the BOE this year to a value of $73.5 million. That property, Crystal Flats, at $73.5 million is what it sold for in June of 2019. $73.5 million is what the BOE reduced the assessment to in 2020. That value is $371,000 per unit. The subject, again, is over $400,000 per unit. There is no possible way that Crystal Flats should be assessed at $371,000 per unit if the subject is where it is. And I know, again, we're at 413. A lot of times we look at page 3 and say, hey, the numbers are the numbers, and that's what they are. Something's wrong with those numbers. And what we've been telling you for years, and what the board has recognized, is that the numbers that are being reported by this owner have some issues with them. And they've been corrected over the years with the expenses. The owner is just not that much better at operating a property to justify their property being $50,000 per unit better than a comparable property. And these aren't just comparable assessments. These are properties that sold. So one more on that kind of that thought is Aura at Pentagon City. I think you all know that property. It's a 5-star property, sold in May of 2019 for $427,000 per unit. That's $10,000 per unit higher than the subject property. It makes absolutely no sense. Now, if you go to page 3 and you look at, well, I looked at a 3-year average of the income, and that's what it is. That's what the number comes to, and the numbers are the numbers. The numbers aren't the numbers. We have to test it. We can't just put something in a formula and say, does it make sense? Because when you do that, this property is not more valuable than Aura. It's not more valuable than Crystal Flats. It's dramatically less valuable than the property across the street that is a direct competitor to it, although that property is a 4-star and gets much higher rents than this property, which is a 3-star. So something's missing. And what's missing is we're talking about a property that's 31 years old that is operating, the assessor originally used a 26% expense rate and then bumping up to 28%. 3 years ago, when they had the different guidelines, the expense rate would have been 34 to 38% on this, but they changed the guidelines to a range of per square foot. And that range is like $1 to $1 million. So sure, it fits in the range. Everything fits in that range. So what doesn't make sense? The thing that doesn't make sense is the expenses are so low of what was reported on this that we need to stabilize them up. And the assessor didn't only stabilize them. He saw the expenses that basically they were 3.3 and 3.3, and he originally used an assessment of 2.8. And now he's saying, okay, I'll give you 3.3, but then I'm going to bump the income up $600,000 because I'm now going to take your vacancy rate from 6, which everybody got, to a 4, which I'm giving you now on the test. And I'm taking your gross potential income up higher than the property's ever achieved. The result is, on the original assessment, a value of $413,000 per square foot, when the perfect comp is across the street. It sold in 2017. It just got a massive reduction at some level. And then you have a far, far superior property that, I mean, Crystal Flats is nowhere in the same ballpark as this property. And the board reduced that this year to a value that's about $30,000 less than the current property. So this is my last case of the year. I'd like, if possible, to discuss at least. Look, we looked at page 3 and the numbers are the numbers, but do those numbers make sense? And they do not make any sense, because when we run them against the comps, they're totally out of whack. And it's more apparent on this one than any other property you had this year because the perfect comp exists, which is a superior property assessed at a fraction of the assessment. So for once, I'm done early.
Okay, thank you, sir. And for the county, Mr. Chikas?
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, board members. Good morning, Mr. Chitlick. Speaking about Water Park Towers, this is a 2-building property. Sits in what now I guess is National Landing, Crystal City neighborhood. It's a half-a-mile walk to Crystal City subway station, metro station. When we're looking at the summary sheet, page 3, we can see again this is a property that's performed well. Apartment revenue is up 3 years in a row. The 2019's increase is 2.5%. Parking revenue is up 3 years in a row. Other revenue is up 2 years in a row. Gross potential income is up 3 years in a row. 2019's increase was 2.7%. Very stabilized building, 3-year vacancy average of 3.3%. If we include concessions, that increases to 3.8%, 3-year average. Effective gross is up 3 years in a row. 2019's increase is over 3%, 3.2%. Operating expense as a 3-year average, 3.8. Although we've gone over this case last 3 years, and in fact included a document in this year's packet where basically the appellant admit that the maintenance repair number, the $5 million operating expense reported in 2017 was due to a one-time exterior repair. And so as the board has seen before, we did include column C, which is a reconstruction, excluding that $2.5 million of capital improvement. And again, there's documentation in the packet in which the at that time noted that that was a one-time repair and in fact did not include it in their appeal as well. So if we're using the reconstructed number, we see that it makes much more sense, smoothing out of approximately $3.3 million 2-year average. The 3-year would be $3.1 million average. Either way, the net operating income is up 2 years in a row. 2019's increase was over 4%. When we look at the original assessment, again, as the board has seen numerous times this year, unfortunately, the county underprojected across the board. $340,000, over $340,000 under projection on gross potential income, or well over $600,000 under projection on effective gross. While we missed the mark on operating expenses by $420,000, that still left us over $216,000 shy of the net operating income that was achieved at the property. And again, this is a property that's increased its revenue 4 years now in a row. And you can essentially see that its operating expenses have been stabilized for the most part. If we're using columns A, C, D, and F, you can see that it's 26, 27, 33, 33. As Mr. Chitlick noted, we did test this new information using the residential rent roll supplied by the owner themselves. So these rents that are being projected for apartment revenue, again, very modest increase of 0.4%, less than half of 1%, after increases of 1.5, 2.6, and 2.5% respectively over the last 3 years. We did project a gross potential income increase of, again, just slightly shy of 0.4%. As the board has seen per the Virginia code, we did look at the actual number of vacancy and concessions. We averaged them out even higher than what was achieved at the property last year, 3.4%. The county used 4%. The county actually used the same operating expense that was incurred the last 2 years, 28% of effective gross. And we came to an NOI that still didn't achieve what was achieved at the property in 2019. But again, that called for an increase at the property. As the board knows, without a third-party appraisal, we do not ask for an increase of the property. But given that, again, we underprojected across the board, and even again, allowing with the test for a full dollar amount of the operating expenses incurred at the property, it would have called for an increase of our original assessment. We do believe that based on these metrics, that the county should be confirmed at $149,666,900. And I believe Mr. Bailey just wants to add an word or two.
Good morning, everybody. I just wanted to speak on the perfect comp that was mentioned by the appellant, if I may, since they introduced this property as a perfect comp and the fact that this property was heard earlier this year. I would like to just discuss some differences between these two properties without getting too much into detail. One, Crystal Square was a case brought forth by the authors group. So I think that allows us more leeway to discuss these two differences. When you compare the two properties, Water Park Tower, the case we're hearing now, has had higher GPI, has had lower expenses, and lower vacancy than the comp that he referred to. When you look at the 3-year history that we had for Crystal Square Apartments, they were almost $1 million. They almost generated $1 million less each year than the subject property that we're referring to, while having a little bit higher on the expense side. So we talk about this a lot, like when you bring up a comp, whether it's a sale or you're looking at the per square foot rate, you can't really just narrow in on your primary metric. You got to look at all the details behind it. So when you look at it from a mass appraisal standpoint, Crystal Square Towers, when we saw their property, they not only had higher vacancy than this subject property, their vacancy for the past 2 years was higher than our guidelines. And those were things we took in consideration. This year alone, they were at double digits on the vacancy. When you look at the subject, you'll see that the subject is well below, for the most part, they're well below our vacancy that we use on our guidelines. We use 6%, and each year they're around 3.74, 3.89. So say they're around 4% each year. So that's a 2% difference. And they're comparing it to a subject property, which has been 3% higher than our guidelines 1 year and double our guidelines for this year. So that's the reason why there's a difference in value between that subject property, which sold 3 years ago, that comp property, which sold 3 years ago, and the subject property which we're talking about today, we could point out a lot of other things. Like I said, I don't want to get too specific on the details of the NOI or the expenses because that case has been dealt with and is not owned by this owner. But I can point out that there's a difference in the rent revenue between the two properties where the subject property's rent revenue is higher. There's a difference between the vacancy between the two properties where where the subject property's vacancy is much lower. There's a difference in the expenses as well. So that leads to a difference in value between the two properties and ultimately a difference in per unit value between the two properties. That's all we have to try to give some clarification as to how a property that is right across the street could be lower in value than the subject property, which we're discussing right now. If you have any follow-up questions, we will be glad to assist you with that. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you both. Okay, questions from board members. Mr. Metzgen.
I have one for each party. Actually, I have a comment for the appellant. We hear a lot about, as you did, present average value based on the real estate assessment per unit in a building. And I don't want to admonish you, I've never brought it up, but your colleagues do exactly what you have done. Your colleagues, meaning representing landlords, have done just what you did. Although you were a little bit more forthcoming. You said, well, mixes change among buildings. But never ever this entire year, including right now, have I heard what the mix is. And if you're comparing one building to another, to say it's X percent of studios, Y percent of one bedrooms, and so forth, I don't have a clue. And I'm sure the board doesn't have a clue on how these mixes stack up when you're comparing two buildings. And I think they're pretty knowable. Obviously, you know what the mix is exactly in your own appealed building, subject building. But I think it's pretty easy to find out if you're going to bring up other buildings to compare to what those mixes are. And just as one side example, because I know this well, the river houses as a percentage have an extraordinarily high percentage of studio apartments. And that really skews what the average is. So I think you would help all of us, you and all of your colleagues who can't hear this, if you're going to compare buildings and average price per average assessment per unit, that you ought to bring up what the real mix of the units are. That would be very helpful.
That's on page 67 of my packet, and I did bring that up. So
but in your comparable, I mean.
Correct. So on page 67, I show the unit mix of the subject and of my comparable. And it shows the unit mix by unit type, square footage of unit mix, average rent per unit, average rent per square footage. And that's in my packet on page 67 of 142, or if you look at the other numbers, 4 of 68. So I did exactly what you asked.
I will look at that in a moment. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for bringing it up now. For the department, quick question. The guidelines, as I read it, calls for this kind of building a 6% vacancy rate, but you, in your original, had 6 and then changed it in the test to 4. Why is that?
Yes, sir, Mr. Metzgen. You probably heard us reference this a couple times this year, where the county Virginia code allows the Board of Equalization to consider actuals that are being incurred at the property. So when you're looking at actual vacancy and concessions, you may have heard some of the appellants this year talk about how the county gives everybody a guideline, but the Board of Equalization has different constraints, if you will. And so the Virginia code allows the Board of Equalization to consider the actual performance of the property. So what we do, if they appeal to the department level, we still will use the guideline number that's put up by the county. But if they appeal to the Board of Equalization, we're simply showing you what is going on at the property using the actual performance of the property in 2019.
Because it's so consistent and stabilized in this case, and that's why you chose the 4%.
Exactly.
As it turns out, it's just a tad under that.
Exactly, and you've seen examples the other way too, where we'll use vacancy concessions well above guidelines if that's what's being incurred at the property.
No, I have seen that. Okay, thank you.
But we've never seen them go to they'll go to what the property achieves, but we'll never see them actually go to the correct cap rate at this level, like the 6.1 the comparable sold for.
The question was not directed to you. Thank you. Other questions from board members? Mr. Lawson.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
For the applicant, isn't a better guide to value the value per bedroom versus value per unit?
I mean, the problem with value per bedroom is that that's as if you'd get $1,000 for one bedrooms and $2,000 for two bedrooms, which isn't a straight shot, because there's so many other things that go into an apartment. If you're getting, if you rent a one bedroom, you're getting one kitchen, one living room, and one bedroom. If you rent a two bedroom, you're getting one kitchen, one living room, and two bedrooms. So it's not an apples to apples comparison, but which is why I think a price per square foot or rent per square foot is a pretty good solid comparison. Unit is the industry standard for comparing apartments, as long as the unit mix, like I was stating that we have on page 67, shows that one isn't all studios and one's all two bedrooms. And in this situation, our comparable, the units, you have more units actually in the better property, the comparable property, than you do in the subject. But even so, the per bedrooms, you have a lot more bedrooms in Crystal Square. The other problem with the per bedroom is that it's stating, look, if I'm all three bedrooms, I've got, let's say you have 50 units that are efficiencies and 50 units that are all three bedrooms. If you're doing it a per bedroom, that's saying that the efficiency in the assessment is $1 million. It's $1 million divided by 50 as compared to $1 million divided by 150. So it's saying that the property should be, if it's equal, that it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, the reason I asked the question, I did the math, and Crystal Square is like 229 a unit, I mean a bedroom, and the subject is like 460, 325 a bedroom, so huge discrepancy. You know, the county used to assign parking and used to assign density by bedroom, and then they changed it to unit. So I was just curious your reaction to that question.
I mean, it's certainly a matrix to compare, and every matrix we've compared, when I looked at it in a per unit, per square footage, per bedroom, per asking rent, is not just Crystal Square, but even the other properties that are in the area that have recently sold, is there's absolutely no support for the value that it's placed on the property.
Okay,
And
thank you. Other questions from board members? No? Okay, Mr. Chikas, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Well, I don't think it's influenced Mr. Metzgen's decision, but I will note that the unit mix that's indicated on page 67 is inaccurate. I believe Mr. Chitlick pulled that from CoStar. We have the unit mix from the owner themselves, as obviously we did a review of assessment earlier this year. In regards to the property that we're speaking about, again, the board has seen this numerous times this year. Unfortunately, we did underproject across the board. Remind the board, this is a property that's increased its apartment revenue 3 years in a row, gross potential income 3 years in a row, effective gross 3 years in a row, net operating income is up 2 years in a row. We tested the property using the exact dollar amount within $3,000 of the exact dollar amount spent at the property. That test indicated a value higher than the original assessment for January 1. We'll point out the appellant's pro forma suggested net operating income that was achieved sometime in 2017. So they're under 2018's performance and some $500,000 under 2019's performance. Given the underprojection across the board, given the test that confirmed our original assessment, we do believe the board should confirm the county at $149,666,900. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chikas. Mr. Chitlick, take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, something Kristen mentioned. Crystal Square sold at an Arlington equivalent 6.1% cap rate. The subject is assessed at a 5.49% cap rate. That's the difference. That's why there's such a delta here. And I say Arlington equivalent because that's the base cap rate plus 20 basis points for replacement reserves and then the tax rate. So That's why when you compare it, he says, well, look, my income's my income and that's where it is. And I reduce my vacancy and this and that. Well, that's because the properties are selling at much higher cap rates in this area. Now, if this property was in Clarendon on top of the metro station, he would use the exact same cap rate. Now, so that's part of the problem. The other thing that he did not mention at all was, what about Crystal Flats, which the board reduced this year to a value of $73.5 million. It's a 5-star property. It's assessed at $371,000 per unit. It sold for $371,000 per unit. It's much higher rents, luxury property, much better, as compared to the subject is assessed at about $40,000 per unit. And you compare it to bedrooms, and it's even more of a delta. So everything that we've got going on, he just relies on the numbers. But the issue, when it all comes down to it, a lot of it has to do with what the cap rate is, and the cap rate being applied to this area is incorrect. Maybe once the Amazon effect is in full blown and in 5 years and everything gets torn down and rebuilt, that's possible. But today, that's why the numbers are off, because things are selling in the area at 6, but he doesn't look at it by area. He's saying, and I say he, this isn't a personal attack on Chris, I mean the county. They look at one county, and one county within a half mile of a metro, and all metro stations are not equal, which is shown by your rent and which is shown by your numbers. So this is my last case of the year. I thank you for listening to my rambling, and I'll see you all next year. Thanks.
All right, thank you both. Okay, it's just among the board members now. What's everybody think? Mr. Lawson.
Thank you. I don't know that I'm necessarily going to a conclusion, but I wanted to share a couple observations. What we're seeing in the marketplace out there right now is a couple of things. We're seeing our developers moving towards more 1-bedrooms, more efficiencies, 2 bedrooms. They hate doing 3 bedrooms. We're seeing the unit sizes going down. And we're seeing the parking being provided going way down, all of which eschews how much it would cost to build this product. I'm not sure what value the comparing unit to unit is, and I've thought a lot about it on some way to try to understand. If something just sold at a much lower price per unit, whereas this one's assessed at a higher per unit, is that really that relevant? And I'm not sure. I just wanted to share that this is what we've been seeing out there, and I don't have a conclusion right yet. I want to see what other members of the board say.
Okay, thank you. Other comments, Mr. Hoffman?
I was just thinking about the on the original county's assessment. I felt like the expenses are a little low. It got fixed on the test to basically match 2019, and then but a lot of other things changed on the test, so which made the assessment go up. So I'm not really sure how to react to that. I certainly don't think it should go up. I'm not really shocked at a $413,000 a unit for this building. I mean, it's one of a kind. You're not going to build anything closer to DC that's still next to Metro. So location is important. That could be a reason for a difference in value. Also, buyer on Crystal Square. I think JBG was the buyer. They're going to command the lowest price you could possibly get in the market because it's going to be an all-cash deal. So I don't know. I'd support a slight reduction, but I can't really see how to get there logically without kind of triggering the test. The vacancy is so low on this property that it's super stable. There was a blip when they went through all the big renovations and everything, and looks like they had some repointing or something done in 2017. But super stable property, super stable market, growing market. I don't see a real downside of this property.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with Mr. Hoffman. I mean, I originally looked at this and thought the expenses were low, But I also think the effective gross income and obviously the NOI as a result is a little low. So I'm not sure I have any strong position on increasing the expenses because I think the NOI, it kind of balanced itself out by having,
Right.
you know, the lower gross potential income before 6%. So, Mr. Lawson.
For Greg, Greg, do you think the fact this has higher parking and has a pretty significant parking income, do you think that makes a difference?
That definitely adds value to the property.
Okay, I can't see Mr. Yates or Mr. Penaranda. So if you have comments, jump in.
This is Mark. I originally looked at the numbers to start with, and the county was pretty reasonable in their numbers. I do think the expenses maybe, but comparing it to what happened in 19, I was very comfortable with their assessment. As far as the issue of comparing it to other buildings and looking at it and hearing the arguments, there's so many factors that go into the assessment itself. And we've had arguments dealing with everything from odors to views and other construction. There's reasons for buildings having different assessments, even though on the surface they may be very equal in what they might have started at. So I go back to the numbers. And I'm fine with what the county's assessed it at.
Okay. Any other comments? No? All right, then I will move to confirm the county at 149,666,900.
I'll second.
Okay, second by Mr. Lawson to confirm the county. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it's 6-0. It's unanimous. The county's confirmed at 149,666,900. Thank you, Mr. Chitlick.
All right, thank you. Crystal Square was bought by Dweck, not JBG. I know it doesn't make that much of a difference, but thank you. You all have a good rest of the year.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Okay, next case on the agenda is RPC, or well, first, is Mr. Branham on the line? I just realized.
Ma'am, Sean Radin, I'm going to be speaking for Mr. Branham today.
On both cases?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Can you turn your camera on, sir?
You know, I have a new computer and everything is working, and I'm actually my microphone, nothing works. So I'm actually calling in on my phone, so
Okay.
I don't know.
All right. Well, we can hear you. So, okay, the next case is RPC 34027-572, and that is 3400 South Clark Street. And so we will hear from Mr. Sean Radin on behalf of the owners of the property. Mr. Radin, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about the property.
Yes, thank you very much. So I just wanted to let the board know that we've been speaking with the county, and you know, we've come to an agreement, and I'm gonna maybe pass this time over to Chris, and he can explain and let the board know about our discussion and the new value that we've agreed on. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of pass this over to Chris, if you don't mind.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chikas?
Yes, ma'am. Members of the board, essentially, we got some information. This case came to us. We scheduled it, obviously, to meet the deadlines by the 31st of this month. Unfortunately, we rushed the process a bit, asked for some information that we received after the board pack was already assembled. Long story short, once we received that information, we did internally make a revision that was agreed upon. We would ask the board to accept a new value of $69,965,000.
And that is my understanding as well.
And then just to be clear, that is just for this, the first case, 34027-572.
Okay, so just to be clear, you originally had it assessed at 135,321,000, and now you're reducing it to 69,965?
Yes, ma'am. We can offer explanation if you'd like.
Just briefly, I'm sure the board members that would.
So we
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
changed
so
the approach to valuing this property. Once Chris received some documents from Tom Branham showing that the project was indeed not complete as we thought it was, we switched back to the cost approach. We go off of site inspections and any kind of documentation that the appellants can provide us to show that the property was not substantially completed. The documents provided, I think yesterday or sometime after this case was scheduled, showed that this property indeed was not substantially completed and should be reverted back to the cost approach. So we took the cost value from Marshall & Swift and valued it as 80% complete based off the photos we saw, and we'll switch it to income approach for 2021.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank
Any
you.
questions from board members? No? Okay, then I will move to accept the county's revised number of 69,965,000.
Thank you, ma'am.
Second.
Okay, motion and a second by Mr. Lawson. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. The county's revised number of 69,965,000 based back on the cost approach has been confirmed. All righty, well, that certainly went smoother than I thought it was going to go. Okay, and the last case for the day is RPC 34027-573 on South Clark Street. And again, Mr. Sean Radin is here speaking on behalf of the owner. So Mr. Radin, you can go ahead and start telling us about this property.
Yes, thank you. This is a small land parcel associated with the previous case, currently assessed at $29,000. We're okay with current assessment. It was originally included as part of our appeal because it was, one of the parcels and it made up the larger piece. And we had thought if there was a discussion as to a portion that was going to be exempt, that the land should be part of that, should be exempt as well. But that's really not part of the discussion right now at this point. So I think we're okay with the current assessment at the $29,000 and change. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ms. Roskin for the county, any comments?
No, ma'am. We're confirming the assessment at the $29,900.
All right, thank you. Okay, any questions from board members? Mr. Lawson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I did an appeal, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, 5 years ago, on a comparable situation. And I noticed that this is at $1 a square foot, I think, is the assessed value. And I think when I did it, I think the county was at something like $5 a square foot. So, I just wanted to share that. I think this is probably right on as far as value. Thank you.
Mr. Matzkin.
I have a quick question for the appellant. You had mentioned, and I think I might have missed something, that there was some exempt, or you proposed there's some exempt property in this large project. Could you expand on that for a sentence or two? What is exempt and why?
yes, well, a portion of this building is being used as what the ownership calls a meeting house, which is part of the Church of Latter-day Saints, more or less a religious community room for the exact square footage amount to give you a percentage. If 20% or more of the building is going to be used, and a large portion of the parking is used for types of religious meetings and such.
And this church owns that space?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the
Okay.
development group that built this property is owned by the Church of Latter-day Saints. And so they've included this portion of the building for that. And so at a later date, we'll be discussing that at some for 21. But that's not that is really being considered right now. You know, going to be the next phase of the assessment process.
Okay, good. That makes sense. Thank you.
Mr. Lawson again.
Yes, thank you again. I don't think that's our decision. I think we decide value, but we don't decide whether something is exempt or not from tax. But I think this, if I'm not mistaken.
Hold on one second, Mr. Lawson, because that's in comments and we're still in questions.
Okay.
Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, Ms. Roskin, do you have anything else that you need to tell us?
I just wanted to add very quickly that this property, it's being used as density, and it's supporting the entire, it's part of the entire PDSP for site plan 346. And we actually reduced the land value on the Clark, which was just heard earlier, because we're valuing this at $1 per square foot. So if we weren't valuing this, then that amount would be lumped back over to the Clark. Okay, so the value's going one place or the other. Like I said, the Clark has been reduced and it's placed here, and it's only $1 per square foot, and it's one of a dozen parcels that support the entire PDSP for the density purposes.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Radin, do you have anything else that you need to tell us to wrap this up?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now it's just among board members. Mr. Lawson, did you have anything else you wanted to say?
I was just going to share that I think the property has to be used solely for church purposes, not partially. And so that's something that the tax authority will eventually conclude.
Right, and that's actually for future, next year we can, take a look at it. It doesn't really have any bearing on January 1st of this year. Any other comments, concerns? No? All right, then I seem to be on a roll here. I will move to confirm the county at 29.9.
Second.
Okay, motion is second by Mr. Lawson. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, it's also unanimous. It's confirmed at 29,900. All right, thank you, Mr. Radin.
Thank you all very much. Have a great year.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, is there any other business from board members?
Yes, I have one clarification for the first case. I know we confirmed that at 149,666,900.
Mm-hmm.
The first page on the memo shows $100 less, but I just wanted to make sure that that's the number. Because a lot of the things that go behind the scenes that you guys don't know is what we go through with Rosa to make sure that the numbers are correct in the orders. So we need to make sure that the $100 difference is shown in one of the orders.
Okay, Mr. Chicas, can you
Yeah,
confirm?
we'll make, yes, ma'am. Yeah, we'll make sure that adds up correctly.
That it matches. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we're sticking with the 149,666,900 then.
That's what I have on my spreadsheet, and I'll verify against the county's webpage.
Okay. All right, thank you. No other business? Mr. Penaranda. Okay, just to let everybody know, we will be meeting 2 times next week. We are meeting on Tuesday and Wednesday to wind up the final 10 cases. It's going to be a little bit lighter day on Tuesday, a little bit heavier. There's 7 cases on Wednesday, but they're all related together, which is why we're putting 7 in together. So anyway, all right, then we will stand adjourned at 9:45 and re-adjourn on Tuesday, October 27th at 9 a.m. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.